Victorian London, fog-soaked alleys, gas lamps flickering above cobblestone streets. Beneath them, a world of poverty, desperation, and whispered fears. The slums of Whitechapel teemed with crime, disease, and shadowy figures who disappeared into the night. But in the autumn of 1888, a new kind of fear gripped the city. A fear that bled into newspapers, into barrooms, into bedtime stories. It was the fear of a man, or perhaps just a name, that would echo through history: Jack the Ripper. He wasn't the first killer London had seen, and certainly not the most prolific by modern standards. But his legend endures unlike any other. Why? What is it about this faceless butcher that continues to fascinate and horrify us more than 130 years later? Let me ask you, why do we keep obsessing over a killer we never truly saw? Is it the mystery or something darker within us that refuses to let it go? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The figure of the serial killer holds a strange duality in our culture. We fear him, yet we're drawn to him like moths to a flame. Like horror movies or ghost stories, Jack the Ripper was terrifying precisely because we couldn't catch him. Evil wore no face. It slipped between gas lamps and vanished before dawn. But before we descend too far into the shadows of London, let's take one brief step sideways, into a different kind of story. One that may feel closer to home than you think. By the late 1800s, nearly half of Britain's working class was engaging in small-scale retail or home production. Mail-order catalogs, early department stores, and street peddlers dominated daily commerce. But it wasn't until the explosion of printed advertisements and postal sales that everyday people could access luxury items, discounted goods, and imports. Back then, the world was waking up to the power of fast sales, limited-time offers, and scarcity marketing. Even without the internet, people were already in bidding wars for rare fabrics, salvaged goods, overstocked items. Why mention this here? Because the Jack the Ripper case was shaped not just by blood and bodies, but by publicity, spectacle, and market frenzy. Just like the newspapers of the time knew, if you could capture attention, you could control the story. And Jack's story sold better than any other. Back to the alleys. August 31st, 1888. The lifeless body of a 43-year-old woman named Mary Ann Nichols was found in Bucks Row, now Durward Street, in Whitechapel. Her throat had been slashed. Her abdomen brutally mutilated. It was horrific, yes, but at first, police thought it might have been a drunken scuffle, a robbery gone wrong. That is, until they looked closer. The wounds weren't sloppy. They were clean. Intentional. And this wasn't the first time. 2 other women had been killed in the months prior, both prostitutes. Both left in public view. Still, the authorities weren't convinced these murders were connected. But the newspapers were. Before the police even released a formal statement, the tabloids had already connected the dots. "A single killer is stalking the women of Whitechapel," screamed the headlines. Panic took hold. Only then did Scotland Yard assign serious detectives to the case. The autopsy of Mary Ann Nichols was led by Dr. Wynne Baxter, who concluded at first that there was no connection between the killings. And just as the press began to move on, a week later, another woman was found. Her name was Annie Chapman. This time, the crime scene was worse. Much worse. Her body was slashed open, organs removed. It wasn't a drunken fight. It was deliberate. Precise. Cold. Dr. Baxter now changed his position. This was the work of the same man. And a new theory emerged. The killer had anatomical knowledge. Perhaps he was a butcher or a surgeon. That one theory changed everything. Suddenly, Jack the Ripper wasn't just a madman, he was a professional. A man with skill, planning, and a taste for ritual. The press loved it. The story practically wrote itself. But let's pause again and look at this through today's lens. 5, maybe 11 victims. No clear forensic trail. No photograph of the killer. Nothing definitive at all. In comparison to modern serial killers like the Zodiac or Andre Chikatilo or Ted Bundy, Jack the Ripper's kill count was small. But still, his name endures above them all. Why? Because of timing, technology, and the media. The official story of Jack the Ripper begins on the morning of August 31st, 1888. A body was found in one of London's poorest neighborhoods, Whitechapel. The victim was a 43-year-old woman named Polly Nichols. She was discovered lying on the pavement, her throat slit, and her body mutilated in a way that ruled out common street violence like robbery or drunken scuffles. At first, the murder might have seemed like just another tragedy in a crime-ridden district, but two crucial details made it stand out. First, the nature of the wounds. These weren't random or frantic. There was something precise, almost ritualistic, about the violence. Second, this wasn't the first body. Two other women had already been murdered in that same part of London over the preceding months, and in similar ways. But here's what's truly fascinating. It wasn't Scotland Yard that first made the connection. It was the newspapers. The press, hungry for drama and profit, linked the murders together and began speculating about a single killer behind them. They even gave him a shadowy persona, a faceless predator of the London fog. Have you ever wondered what kind of world allows a killer to become a legend? And do you think the media has more power over what we remember than the actual facts? The sensational headlines were impossible to ignore. Panic began to spread like wildfire, especially after the fourth murder. On September 8th, just 8 days after Polly Nichols' death, another woman, Annie Chapman, was found brutally slain. Her body had been disemboweled, and again, the wounds were unusually clean and deliberate. This was no random act of violence. This was something different. Now the public hysteria kicked into overdrive. It wasn't just the brutality, it was the idea that a person could be stalking the streets, methodically hunting down women, and vanishing into the night. It was horror made real, and worse, horror that remained unpunished. For the first time, medical professionals involved in the investigation began suggesting that the murderer might possess anatomical knowledge, maybe even surgical training. This wasn't just a madman, it could be someone calculated, educated, even respected in daylight hours. And as speculation surged, the media latched on even harder. Drawings of knives, maps of the city, bloody illustrations of the crime scenes, everything that could grab the reader's attention made it to the front page. The killer wasn't just stalking women, he was becoming a star. But let's pause here for a moment. In modern terms, Jack the Ripper's confirmed body count isn't especially high. He is linked to 5 canonical victims, though some theorists claim there were as many as 11. Compared to later serial killers like Ted Bundy, Andre Chikatilo, or Jeffrey Dahmer, Jack's record seems almost modest. So how did he become the most famous murderer in human history? The answer is as chilling as it is simple: the newspapers. By the end of September 1888, the name Jack the Ripper still didn't exist. He was just the Whitechapel murderer, a ghostly figure stitched together by newspaper columns and terrified whispers. That changed on September 27th. A letter arrived at the Central News Agency, written in red ink, filled with grammatical errors, and addressed, "Dear Boss." It was signed casually, chillingly, Jack the Ripper. The letter mocked the police, promised more bloodshed, and even included a threat to cut off the next victim's ears. At first, no one took it seriously. The police were inundated with crank letters, hundreds of them, written by thrill-seekers, liars, or the simply unwell. But what came next gave this letter a twisted credibility. On the night of September 30th, a double murder shook the city. 2 women, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, were killed just minutes apart. Elizabeth's body was found with her throat cut, but the mutilations were minimal. Police believed the killer may have been interrupted. 30 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was found in a dark square not far away, her abdomen torn open, her organs missing, and her earlobe had been sliced. The press exploded. Suddenly, that red-inked "Dear Boss" letter didn't seem like a hoax. Maybe the killer really had sent it. Maybe he had announced his next move. The name Jack the Ripper took on a life of its own. Within days, another letter arrived, this one accompanied by half of a human kidney. The writer claimed he had eaten the other half. Whether it was a demented prank or a genuine trophy from Catherine Eddowes, no one could say for sure. But the public had already made up their minds. The Ripper was real. He was brilliant. He was untouchable. What do you think? Is it worse that the police couldn't catch him, or that the public started to almost admire him? By this point, London was gripped by a kind of moral insanity. Newspaper sales soared, over 1 million copies a day in some cases. Competing headlines screamed with blood, guts, and speculation. Detectives were under crushing pressure. Civilians formed vigilante patrols, walking the streets with clubs and lanterns. The idea of a serial killer was terrifying, but it was also magnetic. People couldn't look away. The frenzy wasn't just dangerous. It was deadly. A local Jewish cobbler named John Pizer was falsely accused after someone recognized him and thought he looked suspicious. He was arrested on flimsy grounds only to be released when his alibi checked out. But it was too late, his name had already been smeared across the headlines. Crowds gathered outside the police station demanding justice, convinced he was part of a satanic cult. Even after his release, people whispered and pointed. His life was permanently shattered. Another man, James Sadler, a sailor, was nearly lynched 2 years later when someone suggested he was the Ripper. The public thirst for a face, any face, was becoming dangerous. To understand the chaos fully, you have to understand where it was happening. Whitechapel. In the 1880s, Whitechapel wasn't just poor. It was desperate. Thousands of immigrants, mostly from Ireland and Eastern Europe, crammed into crumbling tenements. Streets reeked of sewage and coal smoke. Crime was rampant and the police presence was barely noticeable. Over 1,200 prostitutes worked the alleys, many of them homeless, conducting business in doorways and alleys for a few pennies. They were invisible, disposable, perfect prey. So when the murders began, it's no wonder they weren't immediately connected or even properly investigated. The victims were women on the fringes of society. Women without protection, names, or power. And then, the letters. The Dear Boss letter was followed by another one, the From Hell letter. This time, the envelope contained a piece of a human kidney, preserved in spirits. The letter claimed the other half had been eaten. It was unsigned. The handwriting was erratic. The grammar was worse. It didn't look like the same person who had written Dear Boss. Some believed it was real. Others said it was a hoax, another twisted prank riding the coattails of fear. But the detail about the kidney. Catherine Eddowes had been found with one kidney missing. The question haunted everyone, was this the Ripper taunting the city? Or just a madman adding fuel to the fire? And here's something for you to think about. Do you believe the From Hell letter was real? Or was the Ripper already just a myth that people were starting to write themselves into? The fifth and final murder, at least the last canonical one, was the most horrifying. November 9, 1888. Mary Jane Kelly. Younger than the other victims. More attractive. She had her own room in a small rented flat. When police found her, the room was splattered wall to wall in blood. Her body had been dismembered beyond recognition. The face was obliterated. Organs were arranged around the room like grotesque trophies. It was the only murder committed indoors. The killer had time, privacy, and he used it. But something odd happened next. Nothing. No more letters. No more bodies. No more Ripper. He vanished. Like a nightmare at dawn. Some believed he'd fled the country. Others thought he'd died. Or been committed to an asylum. But for all the panic and patrols and paranoia, it was over. At least the killings were over. The legend, however, was just beginning. In the months and years that followed, the case of Jack the Ripper refused to die. Without closure, the public did what humans always do. They filled in the blanks. And thus, the myth was born. The real Ripper may have disappeared, but his image grew more powerful than ever. The police investigated over 2,000 people. More than 300 were seriously considered. 80 were arrested. And yet, no one was ever charged. No one was tried. No one confessed. So people began creating their own suspects. Some chose the obvious ones. Butchers, surgeons, unstable locals. Others went grand. Prince Albert. A deranged royal doctor. A Freemason cover-up. The Russian Secret Service. Even the famed artist Walter Sickert was accused by best-selling author Patricia Cornwell, who spent millions trying to prove her theory by purchasing his paintings and searching them for hidden clues. Some suspects were based on actual people, like Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jew who spent much of his adult life in a mental institution. His name continues to surface even today, largely because of a controversial DNA test conducted on an old shawl that supposedly belonged to one of the victims. The DNA was said to match Kosminski's descendants, but the testing methods were flawed. The shawl's origins were murky, could have been contaminated, and most importantly, there's still no direct evidence placing him at any crime scene. So the question remains, was Kosminski the Ripper or just a convenient scapegoat? In truth, dozens of books have been written, each with a final answer, each claiming to solve the mystery, each contradicting the others. And yet none of them have ended the obsession. Because Jack the Ripper isn't just a killer. He's a canvas. He became a mirror for society's darkest fears: immigration, poverty, the failures of police, the exploitation of women, the growing power of the media. All of it swirled into this one shadowy figure. And that perhaps is why he endures. He was never caught, never identified, never punished. That's why the legend never dies. So let's end with a question for you. Why do you think this story has haunted us for more than a century? What keeps this mystery alive in your mind? Leave your thoughts in the comments because maybe, just maybe, someone will finally get it right.